Hey, good morning. It's Core, and we're going to dive into really actually the very beginnings of the From the Core Workbook series. If you are new to this podcast, we are going through the From the Core Workbook series. It's 4 volumes: Reckoning, Healing, Transformation, Hope. We're starting at the beginning, and I'm going to walk alongside you in this journey. Some of it you're going to do on your own because this whole experience is designed for your personal agency. I believe the only thing that's going to heal you is you and God. And so this is really therapy in a box. It's designed for you to take your own healing, mental, emotional, physical, and spiritual healing in your own hands. And from there, from the core of your new identity intelligence, you're going to build a future going forward. So we're going to start at the beginning, and I'm actually going to bring you. So this workbook series went alongside my own journey. I wrote a book called From the Core, A Spiritual Journey of Losing Everything and Finding Hope. And by losing everything, I mean something very specific. When we go through some type of major life change or event, there are really 2 responses that happen out of that circumstance. The first response is we lose some type of label. We were married, we're now no longer married. Consequently, we were a husband or a wife, and we're no longer that label. We no longer bear that label. For some people, when they go through a major life event like that, let's just take that as the example. When they go through the major life event like that, it's a superficial element that has changed, but it doesn't change who you fundamentally are. Yes, it's extremely often dispiriting and discouraging and disheartening when you lose a label like the loss of a marriage and the status that goes along with it, meaning the status of husband and wife, or the loss of a job, or the loss of a friendship. All of these things can be major life changes, or even something like a move. You move from an inner city, kind of like, let's say you move from New York City to somewhere rural like Waco, Texas. You lose the label of a big city dweller. And for some, that's not a big deal. And for others, it's a big deal. The loss of a label is something superficial. But for some of us, when we go through a major life change, we lose our identity. We no longer know who we are. In fact, we sometimes question if we ever really knew who we were at the center of our being, in our essence, at the core. That is something very different than losing a label. That is a deep foundational shift that has occurred and revealed that you don't know who you are. You don't know who you really are at the core. And this whole workbook series is designed for those type of people who have gone through something, they've exited the other side, and now they don't know really who they are at the core. If you want to go on a journey to the very center of your being, the ultimate adventure to find out who you are and who you were always crafted to be, this is the journey. So a loss of a label has some sort of specific elements that come with it. It can be a financial or a practical setback. You can have fear of change as a pain point. You can have fear of change and uncertainty. You can have lack of support from the community that you once had. I know a lot of people in the military go through this. They exit the military and they leave that brotherhood and sisterhood. And now that whole community fabric is gone. And they exit into the civilian world and they really struggle with that. You can also have an attachment to the past. You really liked being married to this person, or you really liked having that job. And you can have a sense of overwhelm and a lack of direction. Those are all very understandable pain points when you lose a label. When you lose a sense of identity, this is what it looks like. You have trouble getting over hurts and trauma. You have trouble adjusting to a new reality. You're overcome by guilt and shame. You can't identify who you are. You are identified rather with this embedded trauma, whatever it is that you've said about yourself over time. Your embedded trauma ends up being your identity. whether you felt like you weren't worthy or you felt like you were broken, that is now what you're identifying with. You can have difficulty establishing your own independence and your own priorities, because when you don't know who you are at the core, it's like, what on earth do you stand on? How are you independent when separated from that person, that spouse, that job, that friendship, that situation? If you don't know who you are at an identity level and you're now separated from that, your independence, you struggle to have independence, because what is that independence standing on? And how do you make priorities when you're not standing on anything firm? If the ground is always shifting and you don't know who you are at the core, there's nothing to really stand on and build an identity and priorities and a future on. You have trouble committing to who you want to become and who you were intended to be in life. You have trouble developing new beliefs. So you're really running a racket of all the past beliefs that you had, and whatever you decided about yourself at 7 years old, you still think that about yourself now. So you have trouble developing new beliefs. Consequently, you have trouble adopting new behaviors. You have trouble learning how to respond differently to triggers and challenges. You battle doubt and imposter syndrome. And you struggle with how long it takes you to get from where you are to where you want to be. A person who knows who they are at the core, who stands on a firm foundation, and who has a future full of hope. If any of those pain points sound like you, stick around. The definition of identity, or rather the thesaurus antithesis, is anonymity. Anonymity. So one is known and one is not known. So anonymity is defined as a state or condition of being anonymous, a lack of outstanding individual or unusual features, impersonality. And the synonym to anonymity is namelessness. Namelessness. It was so interesting because for me, I walked out of a relationship. When I started this journey and I needed to find who I was at the core, I had walked out of a relationship that was 7 years long. It was very unusual, the relationship, because I had traumatic brain injury, and that traumatic brain injury rendered me really home and often bedbound. So this person that I was with was often the only person I saw or interacted with in any given day, week, month. And so I was 100% focused on this person, and I was kind of like the girl under the stairs, you know? My sun rose and set when this person walked in the door. Because of a variety of reasons, and we'll get into it as we go along the journey together, I walked out of that relationship 3 months before we were supposed to get married. And I remember when I did, I went to another location and I got into the shower. I took a shower and I got out of the shower and I was actually at my parents' condo. So I went into my parents' bedroom and I pulled a big white t-shirt. My dad is a tall person. And so I pulled this big white V-neck t-shirt out of his drawer and I put it on myself, and I had my hair pulled back in a tight ponytail like I do right now. And I sat down in the guest bedroom. The closets were mirrored. And so I sat down in this big white t-shirt with my hair all pulled back in front of this mirrored door. And I just looked blank. I was looking in the mirror at myself. But as I was looking at myself, looking deeply at myself, nothing looked back. I was completely blank. That's when I knew that I didn't know who I was at the core. And consequently, not knowing who I was at the core, I felt I had no connection to my name. So my name is Cordelia Yoakum. It's difficult to say. It's very unusual. It's not phonetic. And over time, this Cordelia Yoakum felt like it was a person outside of me that I could look at almost from a distance. Like, oh yeah, there's Cordelia. I didn't think much about her. I didn't understand much about her. I was just looking at Cordelia Yoakum from outside of myself at a distance. And I remember when I lived in Los Angeles, I worked at this fashion company down in a big industrial area in Los Angeles. And so we had this big, huge warehouse. And then everyone that was on the executive team, super fancy, had their names stenciled on their parking bumper, that cement bumper that stops your car from rolling. So we had these parking bumpers outside, and the executive team had sort of the special spots. And when I became an executive, I was also assigned a parking bumper, and I had the ability to put my name stenciled on the parking bumper. At this particular company, and over my lifetime, people have struggled saying my name. The person who was the president of this company was from New York. He was a typical New Yorker, and he really struggled with saying my name. And as a quintessential New Yorker, he didn't let that stop him. He just decided he was going to create another name for me. And so he said, I can't ever say your name. I can't figure it out. I'm just going to call you something different. What should I call you? And I said, and I don't know where this came from, but I said, you can call me Jack. And he said, Jack what? And I said, just Jack. And so from that moment forward, my name for this particular president of this company was not just Jack or Jack, he called me JJ. So not only did he call me JJ, but the rest of the company began calling me JJ. And when I got my parking bumper stenciled on my bumper and assigned to me, Cordelia Yoakum, was JJ. And when I told the story to the man that I was dating at the time, who was very in love with his name, I must say, and it was a beautiful name, when I told him the story, I was laughing. Like, oh, this is so funny. And now that my parking bumper says JJ. And he looked at me and in all seriousness, he said, that's a real problem. That's a real problem. And I didn't know what he meant. When you look at your name as a label, the standard purpose of a name is it's a personal moniker. It's how you're recognized by others. So in this particular company, how they recognized me was JJ. But generally, for most individuals, how you're recognized is by your name. It also often has cultural and historical meaning. It's rooted in a language or tradition. It comes from family and heritage. You're often named after, if your name is indeed Jack, you're named after your Uncle Jack or your father's grandfather or your father's father, whose name may have also been Jack. So it reflects sort of this desire to honor your ancestors or your lineage. And oftentimes there's symbolism and meaning in it. Often your parents will select your name because it means something in its etymology or symbology. That's the standard purpose of the name. When I began my journey, I actually drove down from Seattle to San Francisco, and I happened in the neighborhood that I was in. I just was driving around this neighborhood that I was in, and I happened upon this little tiny gallery. It was a really small storefront. It had a little door in the middle, and on both sides, kind of these picture windows, those bay windows that are very typical that you'll see all over San Francisco. And in each window, there was a painting that was very large, but sort of looked like a child had made the painting. And so I was very compelled, and I went into this particular gallery. And the name of the gallery is Creativity Explored. And when I went in, I noticed right away that something was very different about this gallery. The paintings all had a sense of childlikeness about them. And so I began having a conversation with the woman who was behind the counter in the library, in the gallery rather, and she was talking to me about the gallery. And as I was standing there talking to this woman, my eye caught a door on the side, and I saw that there was this large room behind this door. So while it was a small door front, that belied an actually very large space. And so I saw all these people sitting at tables, and she was talking to me, but I was kind of looking sideways into this room, and she said, "Would you like to go back there?" And what she was explaining to me is Creativity Explored is art therapy for adults who have disabilities, often mental disabilities, which helped me understand what I was looking at when I was looking at these paintings. And so when she was explaining this to me and I saw the room, I saw all of these adults who were at these tables painting. And she said, "Would you like to go back?" And I said, "Oh yeah, can I? I'd love to go back." So when I went back, there was a gentleman that came rushing up to me and started talking to me and sharing about his art and his art journey with me and all the things that he was painting. And so he was telling me about this one painting that he had done and showed it to me. And it was a big red dinosaur. And I said, "Oh, this is amazing. I love this dinosaur. What is its name?" And he looked at me very seriously and he said, "Dinosaur. Dinosaur." And I said, "Oh, that is so cool." And he said, "What is your name?" And because I have such a disassociation from my name, and I know it's so difficult for people to say, I've often gone by the short version of my name, which is Core. And that's what I told him. My name is Core. And he jumped back. He flew back from me in like this surprise. And then he rushed right up into my face, and he said, "That's the coolest thing I've ever heard. Your name is Core. You're from the core. That's so cool." And I was so taken aback because he said, "I've never met someone from Middle Earth before." That's what the name Core meant to him. And what he didn't know and what he could not know is that that's how I felt. That I was in the middle of this transformation. I had descended from this state of blankness where I didn't know anything, and I began walking the journey to understand who I was at the core. And as I descended into Middle Earth, into this area that was hot and molten and forming and liquid. That's who I was. I was Core, a woman from Middle Earth who was forming and transforming at the core of her being. I had a friend named Shelley who came over one time as I was beginning this journey. And she said to me this thing. She said, "Your name is Cordila and everyone calls you Core. You have to get right with that. People want the core essence, the core energy, the core presence. You have to do a better job respecting where God positions you and the gifts that He gave you. Have reverence for what He gave you. Use it. Double it." And what I realized at that time, although I had no real relationship with any God that Shelley was talking about, I'd had a journey with faith very early on in my life, but really had no interest in continuing it for a variety of reasons. But when she said that to me, you have to do a better job respecting where God positions us and the gifts He gives us and have reverence for it and use it and double it. What I understood in that moment is I didn't only not understand my name, I didn't understand what was in a name. There is another layer of naming that is rooted in a biblical intelligence that says your name describes your identity and your character. Your name identifies your divine purpose. A name signifies a covenant and a blessing. A name carries prophetic significance. And there is something even more beautiful about a name. If you are experiencing a distance from your name, a lack of rootedness in it because you don't know who you are at the core, there is this beautiful verse in Isaiah 43:1. And it says, "But now this is what the Lord says, He who is your creator, Jacob, and He who has formed you, Israel, do not fear, for I have redeemed you. I have called you by name. You are mine. And that is the truth about going on a journey to the core of who you are. You will not ever know who you actually are. You will not know and understand yourself until you know and understand God. And we are going to have to go on that journey together, because the journey of self-awareness intersects with spirituality. Those two go together. But for right now, no matter where you are in the journey, with God or without, you need to know your name. And so if you go to pages 35 through 38 in the From the Core workbook, in the very first workbook, Reckoning, and you'll notice, if you're watching this on video, you'll notice I'm writing in this too. I'm going through this with you. When I wrote the book From the Core, A Spiritual Journey of Losing Everything and Finding Hope, I captured all this information, and I did not see, while I was writing it, I did not see that there was a process and a plan and a strategy that was unfolding. I didn't see that at all. But once it was published and looking back on it, I could see the wisdom in the strategy, that there was a process and a plan all along. And so that book, my From the Core memoir, is the spine for this journey, because there was this wonderful woman that I know, her name is Christine, and she said, Core, when I read your book, it made me want to go on the journey too. So this book is about you going on the journey yourself. The From the Core book was written by me. This From the Core workbook series is going to be written by you. You are the author of this book. Of all 4 workbooks, you are going to be the author of this journey. So if you have not bought the workbooks, or let's just start here. If you have not bought the book or read the book From the Core, do you need to read it? No, you don't. There is content in this workbook series. In fact, I start the workbook with the conversation that I just shared with you about creativity explored. And that is found right here. So again, if you are looking at this on video, you'll see that in the workbooks themselves, there is content already in the workbooks that is in kind of a beige box. Those beige boxes signify that content is found in the From the Core book. The most important information relevant to the journey that you're going to go on, I pulled from the Core book, and it's found here. So do you have to read the book From the Core? No, you don't. That is there for inspiration so that you know a little bit more about me and my journey, because I'm going to focus this conversation about you and your journey. So that book is there if you want the inspiration, if you want to know more about me and my journey to the core. The important information I pulled forward. I also pulled forward quotes from different people that spoke into my life at different phases, so that as I was empowered and emboldened by those quotes through that journey and at that time, you can be as well. So we have wall-to-wall quotes. Then we have definitions. So I do a deep dive on different words, because nothing is more important than the etymology, the root of where a word came from, in helping you understand its definition. And then we have a lot of space for people who like to write. We have a lot of empty space in these workbooks for you to write in the margins, doodle if you're a doodler, write circularly if your thinking process comes in circular fashion. And then we have beautiful imagery so that you can begin to have an experience visually, viscerally, as you go through this healing from the core. Then we also have, and again, well, let me show you a part that doesn't have my writing in it, because I wrote a lot already in preparation for this conversation with you today. So you'll see here that there's sections in the workbook where I pull forward questions. These are questions that I was asked during this time. They were asked of me, or I am asking of you, given the hindsight that I have having gone through the journey. So in this workbook series, there are 1,295 questions. So this is a deep dive. This is a very deep dive. And then in some other places, we have what I call a query, and that is a blank page for you to capture any thoughts that you have in any form and shape that you want. So here's a double query page. You can see that there's just a probing question at the top and then a lot of space for you to write. So all of these sections are there to guide you on your journey to the core. But for today, and just for today, for those of you who are listening only and not participating on the workbook level, I want to make sure that you have something as well. For those of you who are going through the workbook, you'll notice that there are a lot of things that we talk about in the labels section. We talk about, obviously, your name. We talk about the makings of identity, who you are when you're stripped nude. We talk about who you are as a human and what that means to the labels and the identities that you put on yourself. We talk about joining. So for those of you who have created a covenant with another person, that's a very foundational covenant because it actually changes your identity. So we talk about that. We talk about your heritage. We talk about your faith, because the faith of your family, the faith of your ancestors often shapes your identity and your experience. So we talk about that. We talk about children for those of you who have children. I do not. So it's not a requirement to go through this process, but we talk about those as well. So it's very meaty, but I pulled out one section of the makings of an identity, which is your name. And I ask some of the following questions. And I would love it if you would put them in the comments below. If you're listening and watching on YouTube, I would love it if you would add some of this information or your answers to these questions in the comments below. What is your name? What is the meaning of your name? What does the meaning of your name mean to you? What is the source of your name? Where did it come from? What does the source, or being named after someone or being named for something, what does that mean to you? What are the nicknames you've been given? I'm sure you have a JJ in you as well. What are the nicknames you've given yourself? And what is the name you prefer to be called? If you would answer those below, that would be great. And also, if you are going through the workbooks and you've come up against some information just in the first couple of pages and you have a question on it or you want me to talk about it, please add that as well. I'm going to be looking at all the comments and I definitely want to hear from you and hear what would be most beneficial as you go through the journey or anything that comes up along the way. So in the last part of this initial section in the From the Core workbook series, the makings of identity, we talk about something that is foundational if you're going through this journey and you don't know who you are at the core, and that is a schism in identity. A schism is, as by definition, a split or division between strongly opposed sections and parties caused by differences in opinion or belief. It's a cleft. It comes from the Greek cleft or split. There was a moment in time where if you are feeling like you don't know who you are at the core, your identity split. And your belief about who you actually are stood on a separate bank from the belief about who you told yourself you were. And in between who you actually are and who you told yourself you are, a cleft formed, a split occurred. And that is called a schism. So if you are waking up today and you're feeling blank and you don't know who you are and you have no association to your name, or you have a negative association to your name, you have a split at the core of who you are. You have a schism. And that is what we're going to talk about next up. So the next video we're going to cover when a person experiences a profound and often painful disconnect between different aspects of themselves, it creates an internal divide. And it often forms when trauma enters. So unfortunately, we're going to have to go to that first traumatic incident in your life. You may not be aware of what it was. You may know what it is, but you don't want to talk about it. You may have suppressed it. But there is no way to heal and seal up that trauma without actually looking at it. Trauma is fundamentally a loss. It causes you to lose that sense of who you are. But that loss is a loss of innocence, a loss of a sense of safety, and a loss of alignment with your true self. So stick around, do the work, get the workbooks. If you want to download a sample, you can at fromthecore.global. You can download a sample. If you haven't gotten the workbooks, you can get them in digital form or a tactile, visceral experience. If you don't want to buy the whole set because it's too expensive, there is a journal. In fact, there are 2 journals for you. One is designed just like this with beautiful visuals and images, but it's blank for you to capture your own journey. And there's a smaller, thinner journey, kind of a pocket journey for you to also purchase in the event that you want to do that. Or if you just want to listen, and you just want to come along for the journey with me and my voice and anybody who's in the community who's participating in this conversation, you can do that as well. There's a journey for every level. It is not an option, however, for you to not know who you are at the core of your being. So if you have that wounding, if you have that schism, please come with me on the journey. This is a journey of a lifetime. And the stages of transformation are reckoning, healing, transformation, and hope. You will end on hope. That much, I promise you. I'll see you next time.